Hello and welcome to my latest weekly video news from Madison's. Well, as predicted, it wasn't really a surprise. Base rate rose again last week by 0.25%. It was predicted, people were thinking actually it would level at about 4%, but then we had that jump in inflation. So from January to February, inflation actually went up. It went up from 10.1% to 10.4%. And do remember, the government's target is to have inflation at 2%. So we are well above where we should be. It was because of the biggest rise seen in wholesale food prices for some time, which meant there was that big jump, which meant whereas we had been thinking rates would now stabilise at around 4%, the Monetary Committee voted 7-2 to raise them by 0.25%. That's actually the smallest rise that we've seen since August of last year. So looking back at what's happened to base rate started to go up in December 2021, and we've had 10 consecutive rises in base rate since then. Up until August, it was going up by 0.25%, just 0.25% each time. And then in August, we saw that big 0.5% jump. And then indeed soon after, the big 0.75% jump. And then we've had two more lots of 0.5% rise. So it's calming down a little bit by the amount that it raises by. They're still trying to make debt more expensive, which will calm inflation, but it is expected that inflation will massively improve in the summer when all those wholesale gas prices and energy prices start to level out and food prices start to stabilise as well, as the situation in Ukraine has become more normalised. So the world has found a way to mitigate what's going on there. It's thought about 4% of the inflation we're seeing is being caused by the war in Ukraine. So that kind of working its way out. And of course, the news headlines, don't we love our media? They were full of doom and gloom after that base rate rise. Mortgage storm clouds ahead, mortgage prisoners for many. It's infuriating. So let's break that down a bit, shall we? What's happening about mortgages? Well, the banks work out their mortgages, most of them, certainly their fixed rates, on what's called the 5-year swap rate. That is basically the amount that banks will lend money to each other, and that is how they set their mortgage rates. For anybody on a base rate tracker or a variable rate, they will have seen an interest rate rise. A base rate tracker exactly tracks what the Bank of England base rate is doing. So if there's a 0.25% rise, they will see a 0.25% rise on their mortgage. A variable rate, though, that's a bit more grey. It depends on how the bank is feeling about how it's managed its long-term money provision and whether it feels it needs to put rates up. So generally it doesn't track base rate to the same degree. It tends to be a bit more conservative and down against that. But if we look at what's happened to mortgages, if you take this last 0.25% rise, anyone on base rate tracker, it will cost you an extra £24 a month. And anybody on a variable rate, about 15. It varies from bank to bank, but about £15. Now, I know you might say, Deborah, that's only this last 0.25% rise. It's hideous what's happened to mortgages since the base rate started to go up. These are obviously all on average mortgages. But if you look at an average mortgage since December 2021 and what's happening now, if you're on a base rate tracker, you'll be paying an extra £394 a month. And about an extra £250 if you're on a standard variable. That's for an average mortgage. I know here in the southeast we get really big mortgages. We get smaller mortgages as well. They've got a lot of people, about 50% of our homeowners around here don't even have a mortgage. So putting it in context, £24 a month, that's a latte a week from Starbucks. It drives me mad. But anyway, the banks actually, interestingly, after the last base rate rise, a lot of them put their 5-year fixed rates, 2-year fixed rates and buy-to-let rates down because the swap market was calming down. It was felt that with this 0.25% rise, Bank of England felt it was getting a handle on things. And so their mortgage interest rates went down. So nationwide have a 5-year fixed of 3.94%. That's quite cheap, I think. My first mortgage was 17%, so I remember what that feels like. Will base rate go up anymore? It's hanging in the balance a bit, I think. Possibly, I think it will go up one more 25 bp, 0.25% rise to probably, there's a man staring at me now. That always really distracts me. He's moving on. So I think they'll probably go to 4.5%. and I think they'll sit there for some time then. They're meeting again in May. Let's wait and see what they decide then. So, talking of inflation, obviously property is what's known as a great hedge of inflation. That means that the value of your pound invested in a property should outperform what inflation is doing. So quite simply, inflation erodes the spending power of your pound from one day to the next. So if you can buy a pint of milk for X on one day, it'll be a bit more the next day. That's a sign of inflation. So when you're investing your money, you want it to keep pace with inflation, and property is a great hedge for that. And there was a really interesting report that came out that since the last property crash, which was in 2009, almost every single area has outperformed inflation in terms of if you invested in property. And there have been some real stars in there. London and the east of England have outperformed inflation by the most. So London property prices have gone up about 82%. But when you hedge in inflation, it's about 40%. But the southeast has done really well as well. We're about 40% as well once you take into account the effects of inflation. So investing in property, still great. But because of how inflation is sitting so high at the moment, it is anticipated that the real values of property will go down this year because they just can't keep pace with inflation. But it will all sort itself out. Investing for the long term, you're absolutely fine. So that was all a bit of a heavy talk about inflation and property prices and mortgages, etc. So if you want to cheer yourself up, head on over to the Right Move blog. They have got a really good feature on the most looked at properties so far this year. What properties are being more clicked through on any other property. So really good eye candy for your brains there in the terms of what beautiful properties are out there for sale. And if you're looking for a good investment into property, I have just launched a fabulous little one-bedroom flat on Molyneux Park Road. It's been an Airbnb by the current owners for quite a while, and she's also had as a long-term rental. So if you are thinking that you want to invest in property and hedge against inflation, then that could be a great one to give you some return. Would make a great home as well, but for an investment could be good. £245,000, and it's in a really great area, beautifully presented. You'd get a nice return and yield from that, so that might be of interest. Well, I hope you have a lovely week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.